Hi everybody, Nick here, and I talk a lot about fairly expensive knives because I'm crazy. But today I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about production knives, and specifically the difference between an inexpensive knife, a cheap knife, and an expensive knife, in terms of a whole bunch of factors. So, for my expensive knife, I'm going to use the Spyderco Slysz Bowie, which I like a lot. I've reviewed it and just posted a recent ode of love to it. Nice knife. On the inexpensive side, I'm using the Randall Rat 2 or Ontario Rat 2 knife, which is widely held to be among the better inexpensive knives out there. Runs about $30. The Slysz Bowie is about $270 or $300, depending where you get it. And then for the cheap knife, yesterday, as a sign of just how much I love you guys, I went down to my local gas station and I said, "Do you sell pocket knives?" And indeed, they did. The gentleman handed me, with a sense of reverence, the key to the little glass case that also had pipes in it, and pointed to this little gem here. This is a Z Hunter brand ZB138GN, made in China, in case there was any concern. And once you open up this beautiful box, you are confronted with an object of sheer beauty. Oh my God. Go home customs, see a Norseman. Oh, what a freaking gem this is. Yeah. So this is a Z Hunter, whatever the heck the number was. And this is a $9 knife. And man, does it show. So I'd like to talk about what the difference is here between a $270 knife, a $30 knife, and a $9 knife, and address where you need to end up. So first, let's talk about it in terms of use as a blade on an everyday cutting task. Your Slysz Bowie has really good ergonomics. That's, part of the reason I like it. Fits nicely in your hand. There aren't what you call hot spots, where part of it is really digging into your hand. Your Rat 2 also has pretty good ergonomics. I don't like the clip here, but I suspect if I moved it down to the bottom, it would feel better in my hand. But it fits the hand nicely, no complaints. This part here, this is called thumb jimping, is a little bit, it's a little sharp, but such is life, and we'll get there. Your Z Hunter is questionable ergonomically. It's a very thick knife, and these skulls are in there, and this clip, which only has one position, is very, very wide. And you can see exactly where it's been bent, and so when you're holding it, it's not very comfortable in your hand. But again, it's $9, what do you expect? So that's kind of the first issue, is ergonomics. I wouldn't want to be cutting for hours and hours with this, just because it feels pretty crappy in the hand. The blade is different here. So this is a 3-inch blade, and this is maybe 3.5-ish, and this is a 3.5-inch blade. And they are certainly blades. Both the Slysz Bowie and the, I'm just going to back that away, avoid contamination. Both the Slysz Bowie and the Rat 2 have a smooth blade, which is generally better for most tasks. Unless you're cutting a lot of rope on your everyday basis, you want a smooth blade rather than serrated or bred. Whereas this has a smooth blade up here and a serrated blade, but it's a very, if you look at the serrations, I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit here. You can actually see that some of the serrations are bent already. So it's not even that they're carved, that's how they're forged in there. They're press stamped. And so they've got a little bit of hooking on them, and the serrations are pointy, but they're not at all sharp. So that's the kind of thing we're working with here. Speaking of sharpness, these knives vary a little bit in that way. So this is just normal, boring copy paper. Your Slysz Bowie, and given I put a custom edge on this, but it's just beautiful, and I ran off the edge there. But it can make just beautiful, effortless kind of cuts. Your Rat 2, I haven't actually put any work into the edge here, but it's actually doing pretty okay, which is nice. Again, that's not as smooth, but it's pretty damn smooth, and it's certainly not bad for a $30 knife. Can't complain at all. Your Z Hunter over here, let's try it. Okay, it's making some cuts. You can see that it's... So right here, there's a dead spot in the sharpening. So it's not terribly sharp, and let's try with the serration area. Yeah, that's not sharpened at all. So between the serrations, oh, sorry. Between the serrations, you can't actually do any cutting. It's just this front part here. Oh. And what looks like what's happened, actually, and this is more apparent if you feel it, but there's actually a very strong burr on it, so that there's a small part of the edge that's kind of bent over, and that's contributes to some of the sharpness. But if I were to cut into something hard, this knife would very quickly begin feeling dull. Compared to on your rat here, there's not really a burr. It's just a sharp knife, even though it's a $30 knife. So that's a bit of a problem for your Z-Hunter here. Another thing that you got to worry about a little bit is deployment and smoothness there. So your Z-Hunter has an assist built into it, and that's because flippers that are of low quality don't work without an assist. This knife doesn't even have a detent, it just uses the assist to push it. So it's not a very smooth knife, and you can hear how gritty the movement is. Your Rat 2 is just a normal knife, but it's actually fairly smooth in the grand scheme of things. You can kind of hear that there's some grittiness there, but it's not a bad thing, and it's pretty smooth. It's not like fall shut kind of smooth without some doing, but it's okay. And your Slysz Bowie is just smooth. It's really, really, really freaking smooth. Very, very nice. And so that's more of an aesthetic thing, but it's also nice when you're on an everyday basis trying to close it. Also note that because this is poorly assisted, it's very difficult to close it one-handed. So that's something to keep in mind as well. In terms of your lockup, this is a very important thing. If you use a knife as a cutting tool, you want to make sure that if it locks open, and it's not going to cut on your hand. So in your Ontario Rat here, the lockup is good. It looks to be about 75%, which means that the lock bar is about 75% over on the blade tang, and it's pretty confident. I can do some spine whacking, and there's no real problem here. A little tough to disengage, but that's okay. That's the way you want it to be. Slysz Bowie, your lockup is right at 50%, and I love the sound. But it's very secure. There's no problem. Spine whack all day long, no issue. Your Z-Hunter over here. So it's hard to see inside there. I'm hoping you can get there. So the tang of the blade is kind of hovering in this handle, and your lock bar is about 75% of the way over this time. If I open it very softly, it pops over maybe 10% of the way, and doesn't feel very strong, although it held up to that. Here. Okay, I'll be damned. It actually survived a bit of spine whack. Oh, but now it's actually... Wow. Okay, let's take a look here. Now, if you can see it, it's actually on the other edge of the blade tang. So if I were to do that anymore, it would pop to the other side and the knife would be broken. Or at least be very difficult to restore. So that's no good. That's a bad news kind of thing. And now, after I've done that already, the lockup is deeper. So this is not a very durable knife because of that. That's the difference between cheap and inexpensive. So yeah, I wouldn't trust the lockup on this knife at all. Because the lockup is, let's say that you're cutting, but you accidentally overcut and end up with the back of the blade on the table. The lockup is what keeps the knife from shutting on your fingers. And that's kind of an important thing, because I like my fingers. Let's talk a little bit more, though, about some of the details, because that's where the difference between your $30 knife and your $200 knife comes into play. First, we can look at the fasteners on things. That's often telling, because, well, yeah. These are very, very crappy little screws. This screw is actually already a little bit stripped in here. And this pivot screw has an Allen key on one side, and it's just a ball on the other. These are, again, Phillips heads, and you can feel burrs on the screws, which is kind of important. On your Rat here, these are very straightforward hex key bits, and these are all the same size, as opposed to these two, which are one size, these two are another size, and this is a whole other type of screw. On your Slysz Bowie, you've got 3 sizes of screws, actually 2 in terms of the torques required to do them. You've got these 2 here and these here. They're all titanium from the looks of them, and they're fine. Smooth screws, no problems. So again, even at the quality of the fasteners, you can see the difference between your really cheap knife and your inexpensive knife here. Another thing to look at are the details like the chamfering on the blades and on the pieces of it. An inexpensive or cheap knife will often cut corners in terms of fit and finish and rounding. So this edge right here on your Slysz Bowie is a 90-degree edge-ish, but it's been rounded very nicely so that if you run your finger across it, there's no pain, you can do something like this without any risk. And in fact, the back of the blade itself has been rounded off completely, which is one of the things I really like about this knife. It's just a nice little touch. Same thing with the edges of the TI. Obviously on your Z Hunter over here, all of these edges are actually, I won't say sharp, you're not going to cut anything with them, but they're certainly not comfortable. If you were to put your fingers against this and press, you're going to hurt your fingers. It's not a great idea. And same thing on the thumb stud. On the thumb stud, these surfaces are actually a little bit on the sharp side. Your lock bar is kind of sharp, your liners are kind of sharp, and your liners don't exactly match your G10 either, which is another, well, G10, I'm sorry, your plastic. Which is kind of another little fit and finish detail. But none of the edges that should be smooth really are, and in fact none of the edges that should be sharp are either, so that's a problem. And this actually persists a little bit into your rat too, which is one of few digs I have of this knife. These edges up here are a little bit on the sharper side. They have been chamfered a little bit, but not a lot, and I'd like to see them smoothed out a little bit if this were more than a $30 knife. Same thing on the liner lock, is a little bit smooth. Other little details, like the detent. On your Ontario here, there is an actual ball detent. I don't think you're going to be able to see it here, but it's in there, and it's pretty nice. In fact, there is some resistance, and with doing that, if you smooth this knife out, you'll be able to actually flick the knife open someday, which is a good thing. On your Slysz, obviously, they've kind of dialed in the detent, which is nice, and it allows you to do things like that. So the detent is another area where that's worked. On this knife, I can't actually tell if there is a detent or not. I think there might be a little detent pipe in there. Yeah, it's not a ball by any stretch, but it's a little piece of metal. But it doesn't engage with anything on the blade. It's perfectly smooth to get the blade this far, and it relies on the fact that it opens very slowly until that assist spring kicks in to stay shut, which is kind of dangerous. If you've got it in your pocket and you accidentally touch it up there, it's going to try and pop open on you. So that's another kind of area in which you got a problem. And finally, the clip. This offers you a tip-down carry, and that's it. And it's a very wide clip. It's a very long clip. And frankly, it's a pretty shitty clip. I can already tell, just by stretching it that much, it's starting to... Oh, that's cool. You can see the threads of the screw behind the clip here. And they're starting to pull out a little bit, and the clip is already starting to spring a little bit. Versus on your rat here, you've got tip-up or tip-down carry. Clip is fine. It's solid. And the Slysz Bowie has one of the best clips Spyderco makes. So, again, that's the difference. What I'd like to finally do here, and we're going to take the Slysz out of it just because why bother, I'd like to show you some of the components. And so I'm going to use a little bit of movie magic to disassemble these knives. Ready? Bam! Here we go. Disassembled. Movie magic. That's right. That's why my friends call me David Copperfield. Anyways, the disassembly is kind of revealing, because you can see that on the inside, your rat is actually still a pretty decent knife. So for instance, they're actually specialized, it's milled out in such a way as to keep things oriented. So if you take a look at your back spacers here, your back spacers on your rat, hopefully you can see this, all have a little cutout to make sure that they're properly oriented and they don't rotate. And you can also see from above that they're milled so that they stick into both sides, so that actually adds a little bit more security. You can compare that to the back spacers on your Zombie Z Hunter, which are very, very, very thin little tubes of metal that wrap around large screws. So there's not really a whole lot of security going on there. Similarly, the liners here on your Rat 2 are actually pretty nice. They're still steel, but they're satin coated, they're chamfered on the inside, and you can see that the liner and the G10 kind of naturally want to stay together. That's as opposed to here, your liners on your Z Hunter are, well, they're steel, they're not chamfered at all, they don't really even match the plastic in any particular way. You can see the plastic sticking around the edges. We can see the detent here, which appears to be a piece of soldered-in wire, maybe, which is fun, but again, with no corresponding hole on the blade, which is, again, pretty entertaining, and they painted over the detent track. Let's look at the assist mechanism here. So this is the assist. The assist sticks into this little hole here on the blade, which was drilled through the washer, which isn't a great plan in general. And on the other side of that hole is this spring, which is held in place by nothing but the position of this liner, which, okay, whatever, can get past that, but not a great idea. Your stop pin here is not at all symmetrical, or, man, that's some quality steel right there. So anyways, even at the taken apart level, oh, and the washers is another important thing. So these washers appear to be, I think they're just plain plastic. Maybe they're a PVC sort of thing, but they're not great. And these washers are going to degrade over time, obviously, as is the rest of this damn knife. They're going to degrade over time, and so the 50th time you flip this knife, they're going to be in worse shape. As opposed to over here, on your Rat, where your washers are, here, I'll just show you this one. Your washers are probably a phosphor bronze of some variety, and these are actually going to smooth out over time. So with this knife, the Zombie Hunter, every time you open the knife, it's going to be a little harder to open it, and it'll be a little less smooth. Versus on the Rat, every time you open the knife, it'll be a little bit more smooth. And then finally on the blade, there's not a whole lot else to say, except just, wow. This is kind of a piece of crap. You can see the detent track here. There's a hole for the detent ball, versus here, it just kind of rides on there. And, yeah, that's a gem. So, and I mean that sarcastically, if you go buy a Z Hunter on my account, oh man, is it freaking over. You are unsubscribed administratively. So, through some more movie magic, I'm going to reassemble these knives. Bam! Alright, movie magic again, reassembled these knives, kind of. So the Rat 2 went back together just fine. I might have tightened the pivot a little too tight, which is actually another sign of your really high-end knives. You can tighten the pivot fully and they're still smooth. That just requires a lot more attention to detail. But nonetheless, it's a nice knife still. It's well put together. On the other hand, your Z Hunter over here. Upon reassembling it, all three of the screws actually stripped out. So this guy, and this guy, all three no longer function as fasteners. They've been rounded out. Even using a high-end screwdriver just didn't work. So actually, this knife is now officially dead after putting it back together, which is pretty entertaining, all told. I mean, honestly, my hat's off to the 12-year-old who put this together the first time. Let's just be honest here. This was probably not built by sanctioned labor. This was really hard to put back together, and given the fact that all the screws stripped, it's really, really hard. So that's kind of a shame, but that's also a good lesson for you guys. You can buy an inexpensive knife, like this guy for 30 bucks, like your Spyderco Delica for 40 bucks, I'm sorry, for about 60 bucks, and like plenty of others out there, and you can get a lot of knife. I'm not a big fan of the steel here. They cut some definite corners on finishing, but this is still a nice knife. This is a good enough knife for most of what everybody needs for an everyday basis. But if you buy a cheap knife, you're going to get, hey, it locked up. That's kind of nice. But you're going to get a piece of shit like this. Oh, stop pin just fell out. And next time you use it, you're going to have yourself a bad time. I'm just going to stop touching that. Or you can go high-end, pay a little bit more money and get something that's functionally perfect. But you don't need to. You can get all the knife you need for 60 bucks, and you can get a lot of the knife you need for 30 bucks. But if you pay 9 bucks, you're just going to get a piece of junk. I hope this was interesting for you. For the love of God, do not buy a Z Hunter. And the Rat 3 or Rat 2 is actually kind of nice. All told. I'm Nick, and have yourself a great rest of your day.